my late father, Nathan Sauder, who came from Poland, wound up in New York, wound up coming to Canada when, during World War I, they were short of tailors. My father and a bunch of single guys in New York who had come to New York, became tailors, were asked to come to work in a local factory called Sanford's in Hamilton. They liked it and they decided to stay. My father was not meant to be a tailor. He was an outdoors type of guy, and he became a junk peddler and a fruit peddler, and eventually became a what you would call a teamster. He had horses, and he would hire himself out to various construction jobs to haul dirt or whatever. During the winter time, construction sort of went flat, so he hired himself out as a driver and delivery of coal, and eventually started selling coal to his Jewish friends and started a coal business. Prior to that, in the summertime, nobody had refrigerators in those days. He became an iceman, and he delivered ice. And it's interesting, and a lot of people would not know this, but ice was cut out of the bay, because the bay was not polluted in those days, and they would be stored in with sawdust in sort of a protected area, and it would last all summer. And that's how they got ice until refrigeration started coming in. So back to my father in the coal business, and I wound up joining him, and then I went into the oil business, and then I went into the stone business, and eventually sold out and become a retired bum. However, back to the early 30s, when he was delivering ice, he didn't know how to drive a truck, so he had a horse and wagon, and that's how they peddled. But not only did he peddle with a horse and wagon, but the junk dealers were horse and wagon, the fruit dealers were horse and wagon, the bakeries, the Allenswig, Dominion Bakery, they all delivered their products by horse and wagon. Where else am I going to go?
First of all, I remember those picks, like to pick up the ice.
Oh, the tongs. The tongs,
right?
Yes, yes.
I remember those from when I grew up in Montreal.
Right.
But you were in the coal business, and then you said you went into the oil business.
Correct.
Were there many Jews in the oil business?
In Hamilton, there was, in the coal business, there was a gent by the name of Steinberg who ran a very, very small business. We weren't large, but we were much larger than he was. No, there was, basically it was not a business for a Jewish boy, because it was all hard work. And we used to deliver coal in 200-pound bags, 10 bags to the ton on your back, because if there was no driveway, you had to schlep it from the sidewalk or from the curb to the bin. So it was a rough, tough business. And it was basically pretty well all manual labor. Even with the coal that came in by carload, it had to be all handled manually. So it was not a great business. I was not too happy with it.
So from there, was it that the coal business petered out, so to speak?
The ice business petered out, the coal business petered out. Ice because of the refrigeration, and coal because of oil and gas. In the days when people were heating their homes with coal, there was a situation where these furnaces had to be tended to twice a day. And every week there would be a bucket full of ashes that had to be dragged out of the house, and the garbage man would have to pick it up. So with the advent of oil and gas, it made things very, very comfortable. At least you weren't a slave to your house.
So if you now go into oil, or maybe I've already asked this, whether there were other people besides yourself who were in the oil business, that is to say, other Jewish families?
No, there was also one other gent that went into the business, but he didn't survive too long. And I, believe it or not, didn't have all of the Jewish trade. I would say with my clientele, if there's 1,200 Jewish families in Hamilton, I could have had 400 or 500, because other people had attachments, did business with these other fuel dealers, and that's how we did our business. I bought a stone quarry at an auction sale in Vineland, and operated that for about 10 years, and then eventually sold it. Basically, when I sold it, it wasn't my intentions to sell the quarry. I was going to sell the oil business, because I thought it would be nicer to be a quarry man than an oil man. However, we got offers that we couldn't refuse, and so it all went in 1968. Even though I was hired by the people who bought us out to continue to manage the company, which I did for a couple of years, and then about 1971 I was completely out of it. And then I went into the mortgage business, and I met Arthur Wise, and we started buying real estate, and on and on and on.
Now that you've spoken a little bit about your own work career,
right?
Can you remember back to the Jewish businesses that were in town in the 30s and the 40s? Are there any prominent ones that flash through your mind?
Yeah, definitely there was. But basically, in the 30s and 40s, most of the retail, most of the Jews were in stores, or they were peddlers. Very, very few worked for somebody else other than in the automotive business, the auto parts business, and the scrap business. The predominant families were the Goldblatts, and then there was the Levies, and then there was the Hotzes, and Pekins, and in the automotive, it was the Katz family, Murray Auto Parts, Gordon's Auto Parts, Atlas Auto Parts, which was Sid Cudlitz, my buddy, Phil Rosenshine with Midtown Auto, and they all did very, very nicely. But very, very few people, very, very few Jews were able to get jobs in those days. I, believe it or not, was fortunate. I was the first employee of the United Gas Company. I worked in the meter department in 1939. And it was only because of my father's influence, because he bought Coke. When I say Coke, I'm talking about the Coke that you burn. He was a customer because it was a byproduct of the gas company, so he got me a job in there. And my first job in 1939 was $65 a month, and I got a $10 raise after 3 months, and they told me, don't look for any more money because that's it. So what happened, why I got out of there, is that my dad took sick in the early 40s, and he asked me to come back to work for him. And that's how I wound up in the coal business.
When you say that in those days it was sometimes hard, for Jews to work for other people. I think that's what you said.
Yes, yes.
Was this connected to anti-Semitism?
Of course, of course. Once you put your name down, if they ask you for your religion, that was it. I can't think of anybody that really worked for a non-Jewish firm. And we're talking a lot of people. When the war came along, then things started changing.
Sure, and if there was Eaton's, remember Eaton's in Hamilton?
Right.
Jews back in the 30s would never be working for Eaton's.
Well, there was one Jewish lady that worked at Eaton's.
She worked in the front?
Yeah, she was a sales lady. As a matter of fact, when you mentioned Eaton's, that's what brought that to mind. Her maiden name was Cohn. I can't remember her first name, but she was a sales lady for Eaton's. But there were a lot of retail shops, a lot of menswear, a lot of ladies' wear, lots of millinery places up and down King Street. Every other store was Jewish jewelry stores, and that's where most of the people worked for.
There was a Jewish community center in those days?
There was a Jewish community center on Vine Street, which was an old converted house. From Vine Street, we went to John Street North, and then from John Street, we went to Delaware Avenue, where there was a very, very beautiful center that was built. Unfortunately, it was built in the wrong part of town. Had it been built in Westdale, where all the Jews were going, it could have been still standing today. I think you're old enough to remember that. But it was tragic that it was built there. It had everything. It didn't have a swimming pool, but it had gymnasium, classrooms. Talmud Torah was there. Everything was fine. That was a center point for the kids growing up. And like I said, it's unfortunate the powers that be, I won't mention who they were, but they picked the wrong location. Had it been even west of James Street, any place west of James, it would have been fine. And so it was sold, and it's demolished, it's gone, and so we've got the monster out on whatever road it's called. I've never been there, never been inside.
Yeah, we can talk about whether it's a poor location, not a poor location. I enjoy it only for the tennis courts. The rest of it is of no value to me personally.
Right.
But
well, I don't play tennis, so I'm not interested in going there.
Yeah.
But it's too bad. It's two big mistakes that were made. One on Delaware and one on Lower Horning.
Let me just ask one other question about
Go ahead.
About the anti-Semitism then. I mean, it's true. People would fill out a form and they would be asked to write their religion, and I know that in Toronto you would write Hebrew,
right?
And right away that was it. Was the anti-Semitism sometimes like in your face, where people would say no Jews allowed?
There was a club, I believe it was called Club Miramar, on the way to Toronto, and there was a sign there that said no Jews or dogs allowed. Okay? Now, I'll tell you another incident that happened in the 50s with me. I became a golfer. Not a good golfer, but I go on the golf course. And somebody from Burlington Golf and Country Club invited me there, and we had a round of golf. This gent got a letter advising him not to invite me or any other Jew to the Burlington.
No kidding.
That's right. That didn't happen to somebody else, it happened to me.
Let me ask you another question.
Go ahead.
You mentioned that you and Arthur Weiss were buying properties.
Correct.
I don't know much about Arthur Weiss, but there were times when Jews could not own property in the West End of Hamilton,
In Westdale.
in Westdale.
It's on some of the deeds.
Do you remember that?
I know for a fact that that was so, but somehow or other that ruling got wiped out. But no question, in Westdale, you could not, a Jew could not own property.
Did Arthur Wise ever have trouble buying up real estate?
No. Arthur, if you know Arthur, he's a very, very friendly guy, and he had made some connections with some English or non-Jewish builders and developers, and he got along famously with them. I remember there was a company called Grissom-Waite Construction. They wouldn't do any business other than with Arthur. He handled all of their real estate. And he did business with Abbotsford Homes, a chap by the name of Campbell, and Sinclair. No, Arthur never had a problem. He was always very fair, and he didn't pull any shtick. If they made a deal, whether it was by contract or handshake, he lived up to it, and he wound up with a fabulous reputation for being that kind of a businessman.
When you grow up, does your family belong to the Addis Israel shul, or did it belong to...
My late brother, after he got married, joined the temple. There were only two boys. I have three sisters, and the three sisters were married, and they were all Addis members. One of them was a dual member at Beth Jacob. But
So when you're growing up and you're going to the Addis, chances are that Rabbi Green isn't the rabbi.
no, before Rabbi Green, there was no permanent full-time rabbi at Cannon Street.
Oh.
I'm not sure how they handled it, but I know that there was a different cantor every year, and the late Rabbi Levine would come around and make a speech, but there was no organization. It was just a shul that people came to daven morning and night, and on Saturday and high holidays, and after that there was nothing.
So back in the early 70s, you must have been quite active in the Addis, am I right?
I became active earlier. I became active in the Addis just after the building was almost completed. I was asked to become a board member, which I did, and I worked fundraising with the late Max Hoffman, who actually spearheaded the Addis Israel. Are you aware of that?
Yes.
If it wasn't for him, there would be no Addis. And I don't think there would have been a Rabbi Green here either. But between the two of them, they, I guess, single-handedly built the shul. You know, we live in a democracy, but that's not working at Addis. We got a dictatorship there, but it's a good dictatorship.
It's a benevolent dictatorship.
Right.
Who was the president of the shul when you first get connected in the mid-60s? Do you remember?
Yes, David Hoffman.
Oh, David Hoffman.
Yes.
Do you remember when Rabbi Green was hired?
Yes, I do.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
I really can't, because the only time I saw him was on Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, because that's the only days that I went to shul. And I went to shul this year, and all of a sudden we have a new rabbi. And I wasn't too interested in getting to know him or getting, because I wasn't religious, I wasn't interested. But I remember him coming as a very young guy, younger than myself, and I was impressed with him for what I saw of him. But then when they moved and I became a board member and I started working along with him, when Max Hoffman died, then it was he and I. But he was the driving force. He was the guy that put it together, and it's amazing. If you want to talk about the artists, because I just had an interview over there, I think I told you earlier, but and I mentioned the fact that when Rabbi Green came to Hamilton, shortly after, the talk was that they're going to build a shul in Hamilton. Well, the Cannon Street Shul had maybe 100 members. Most of them were peddlers, a couple of shopkeepers, and there was no money there, but I don't know how Max did it, but they bought the land. They hired a super architect who built this, or who designed this beautiful shul that today looks like it was just built yesterday. Leo Welkowitz was a member, he was the builder, and the Royal Bank was the financier. And how they pulled it, it was amazing. And I remember this little story, which you'll find amusing. I'm out collecting monies to help pay the mortgages and so forth, and I'm really unhappy because people were not really anxious to give money to shuls. So I said to Max one day, why in the world would you burden this small little 90, 100 membership community or synagogue with burdening them with this great big mortgage? And his answer to me, and I'll never forget it, he said, don't worry, we're going to pay for it with cheap dollars. Did you know what that meant? Inflation. When he said it to me, I didn't understand it. But inflation, just think about it. What did you pay for a cup of coffee when you were a kid, or a Coke? A nickel? What do you pay today? Right. That's called inflation. And that's what he told me. And he was right.
Rabbi Green tells the story of his interview in Hamilton, and I'm sure you've heard him tell the story about when he came to Hamilton to be interviewed for the position. And he also tells the story about the Royal Bank, about meeting with some manager and getting $25,000 because some Orthodox Jew had been kind
to his parents up north. Right. Yeah, no, I've heard that story before. I've heard the story before. And also the mikveh. Do you know the story about the mikveh?
Yeah, I've heard the story about
Mr. Siegel.
With the stack of money.
Had a dream that somebody told him he had to give the money for a mikveh, and all of a sudden we have a mikveh.
I can tell you this, I really don't have anything else to ask, but you have added so wonderfully to the story and with information that we have never gotten from anyone else.
Is that right?
It's a real pleasure.
Okay.
I must tell you, when I came, I said, listen, let's get out of here quickly. But once you told me that you almost had me arrested, my fondness for you grew. And you know, you're really in great shape.
Oh, now I have some questions that are off the record.
For the shape I'm in.
I have some questions that are off the record now that we have this opportunity to sit with you, and it will not go into the project, but I'm going to give a copy of this to your family.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so that's why I'm going to ask you some other questions, because I knew your daughter, Shelley.
Shelley, right.
So you can just chill out for a second. You raised children in the 60s, as did my parents.
Did I which?
You raised your family in an era of turmoil, the 60s.
Right.
So looking back on that at this period of your life, like, was it difficult? Like, was it very challenging for a man of your generation to raise children during those years, the hippie years?
I can tell you this much, that Wendy, who is 60 today, Shelley is 54. I had more problems with Shelley, which I regret so much. You have no idea. Her hairstyle. She's a pretty little girl. She used to wear her hair so that it covered her face. Her clothing. She always wore clothes that had to be torn. And I gave her such aggravation over that I tell her today that I regret doing it, but it's too late. But we did not get along well together. I'm sure she had bad thoughts about me, but today we're okay.
Well, I remember in my house, Moish Liebtag used to call my father about, in a fit, because, Hesty and my sister Beverly, and it was like, the whole Jewish community, we were kids, we were caught up in that era. And I'm sure now, like, it must have been hard for you guys, for your generation, to understand what was going on.
Well, we didn't understand. I think most of us were talking quite a few years ago. The men primarily were more involved in making a living. It was not easy. So the chore of bringing up the daughters was basically the mother. And I know that there was some bad kids around town. Touchwood, my kids never got involved in any of the bad stuff, but a few of them did. We lost, look at how many kids that committed suicide.
Who?
Who? Jay Wexler. How about the back kids?
How did they die?
I think from overdoses.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't want to mention her name because I don't want to put it on tape, but you mentioned a little girl that was involved a little bit. Yeah, there was tough times.
Mm-hmm.
But most of us didn't even realize what was going on.
There was a big generation gap.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. I don't think that any generation since your generation has had such a big change to cope with. I think that was just a very difficult time.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the pill also didn't help the situation. I think it freed up a lot of thinking, and that was not healthy.
Right.